Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's Kesher presentation. My name is Dora, and I'm joining you from Budapest, Hungary. And you can also find here Sebastian, both of us under the name Kesher, both of us joining from Budapest. This is a project that we started 6 years ago, and I know many of you know us and our members and our regulars. And thank you so much for your ongoing support. And those who are joining us for the first time, just a very brief introduction about us. Kesher means connection in Hebrew, and we started this project with the aim of bringing Jewish culture, Jewish history, heritage from all over the world onto these Zoom sessions and hoping to connect with each other by learning about each other and about the difference and the diverse Jewish communities that exist in the world. Many of you have been to our regular sessions, which is when we introduce one community very in depth, a city, a country, a region. Today is going to be part of our Get to Know series. I'm sure some of you also have attended in the past sessions in which we introduce interesting projects, initiatives that somehow deal with something similar, something that is related to this overall topic and mission. So today, we are welcoming Adam Hafiz and Dan Brotman, who are the representatives and the creators of Project Diaspora. I will leave it up to them to explain exactly what the project is. But just as a very brief intro, I'll introduce them, who they are. So, Dan is a global migration expert and journalist who has documented lesser known Jewish communities across Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Tunisia. He holds a master's degree in international migration and public policy from the London School of Economics and has over a decade of experience managing travel and leadership programs in South Africa and Canada. Adam is an Egyptian Jew and fluent Arabic speaker. He has documented some of the last remaining Jewish sites in Iraq, Yemen, and Libya. Prior to his current career in tech, he worked in Middle East foreign policy and conflict resolution. Adam holds an MBA from Stanford University and a degree in international affairs from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. So this is Dan and Adam. I'll pass the word to them now, and they will introduce Project Diaspora to you. And of course, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll open up for Q&A after the presentation.
Many thanks, Dora. Thank you for coming, everybody. I normally don't dress like this on a Sunday, but I'm about to go to a wedding, so that's why I have a tie on right now. But if Dan and I were to sum up why we are here in one sentence, it would be this: we're running out of time. Right? We're living in the literal last days of 2,500-year-old Jewish civilizations in the diaspora, and in some corners of the globe, we're down to the final few Jewish souls, most of whom Dan and I have met by traveling to the furthest corners of the globe, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. Why does this matter? Because these are often biblically old, if not centuries old, uninterrupted lineages. Several even date back to the destruction of the Temple of Solomon, and all of them are living libraries of human history, of our history, and they face total extinction in our lifetime. Dan and I have a passion for bottling up these histories. And we are going to invite you over the course of the next hour to some of our favorite places that we've encountered along our journeys. But first, before we tell you more about where we'd like to take you, let us tell you a little bit more about us. I'm Adam, and as Dora mentioned, I'm Sephardic of Egyptian and Lebanese origin.
And I'm Dan. I am fourth generation Ashkenazi American Jewish.
I'm non-Israeli, American Portuguese by virtue of being Sephardic and Canadian.
And I'm, as I mentioned, originally American. I'm also South African. I'm also Israeli. I made Aliyah, and I'm also Canadian because I currently live in Canada and became a citizen here.
I'm an Arabic speaker.
I speak fluent Hebrew.
I've related to my Judaism as a bridge builder between the Jewish and Islamic worlds.
And I'm particularly interested in the Jewish migration experience.
A lot of my time in Israel and the broader region was at a NGO in Gaza.
And I served in the IDF when I lived in Israel.
So we're two different people with a very similar passion, and we've each been to over 100 countries around the world with a common mission, which is witnessing the last remnants of the diaspora before they disappear on us.
And I think it would be worthwhile just to explain where the photos that you see where they were taken of us. So if we just go back one slide. So in this photo, I'm in front of the El Griba synagogue in Jerba, Tunisia. That is arguably the oldest synagogue in the world that's still used as a synagogue. It actually has original stones from the first temple. Because when Jews left the land of Israel, some came to Tunisia and they brought stones with them from the first temple, and they can still be viewed there.
Excellent. And I'm in the Abrahamic House in Abu Dhabi, which was the largest synagogue to be built in the Middle East after Israel was founded. It's a complex of a church, a mosque, and a beautiful synagogue, all co-located in a very powerful statement of coexistence.
And it's interesting because these are two different models of Jewish communities in the majority Muslim world. So you have one community that's shrinking and disappearing, which is Tunisia, versus in Adam's picture, the Jewish community of the UAE, which is being built from scratch. I also just want to add that as a scholar of migration and someone who thinks a lot about migration, there are Jewish communities around the world that were really thriving 50, 60 years ago, and you never in a million years would have thought that there wouldn't be communities there anymore. We are not living at the end of history, which is that's my belief. So 90% of Jews today live in just Israel, the US, Canada, and France. But it would be foolish to believe that we're at the end of history and that Jews are only going to stay in those four places long term. The fates of the Jewish communities in those four countries could very much change in the future, similar to how the fates of the Jewish communities in the places we're about to show you changed in a very short period of time. So we're going to start with Jerba, Tunisia. What we're doing for the places we're
I grew
focusing on is we're showing you like a 1 minute clip, and then we're going to tell you some interesting stories from each place. Um, just to maybe give you a broad overview of the places we're going to be speaking about today. We're going to be speaking about Tunisia, Syria, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and then Adam is going to be touching on.
Iraq and Libya. Yeah.
There is an ancient Jewish community on the island of Jerba in Tunisia. They arrived around 2,500 years ago following the destruction of the First Temple. They speak Judeo-Arabic, often described as the Arabic equivalent of Yiddish, and their religious practices are highly traditional and can even be thought of as ultra-Orthodox. When Tunisia gained independence in 1956, there were around 80,000 Jews in the country, but the community steadily emptied out, especially after 1967. By the 1980s, only about 300 Jews remained on the island of Jerba. The Jews of Jerba, however, remained deeply traditional and tended to have large families. Over time, their population grew through natural increase, reaching roughly 1,600 today. Most live in a neighborhood known as the Jewish Town, which is protected by the government. The area is entirely Jewish, with kosher restaurants, schools, and daily religious life. In fact, Jerba is home to 14 active synagogues today. They speak their own language, live in their own neighborhood, and largely maintain a separate way of life from the rest of society. But it is precisely this separation that has allowed the community to survive in a complex region and even to revive after nearly vanishing like so many other Jewish communities across the Arab world. Want to spend a week.
So the Jewish community in Tunisia is a very, very interesting story because similar to other countries in North Africa, after the State of Israel was established, and certainly after 1967, these communities really emptied out. They became very uncomfortable places for Jews to live. In a lot of North Africa, the Jews were actually quite assimilated. So they had the Alliance Française Universelle that came and set up secular schools for the Jewish community where people learned modern Western languages like French. But on the island of Jerba, and again, it's this island where Jews came after the destruction of the first temple. The rabbis made a decision that they did not want their communities to get their community to get a secular education and to integrate with mainstream Tunisian society. And what they did is they put a cherem, a prohibition on learning Western languages and receiving a secular education. So while in other parts of Tunisia, Jews were learning math, science, law, business, and studying French and being able to integrate into the mainstream economy, on the island of Jerba, they were only learning Limudei Kodesh, like religious studies. They were only allowed to speak Jewish languages like Judeo-Arabic and Hebrew. So basically, what happened is, especially after 1967, as the Jewish community in Tunisia really emptied out, and there was a core population of 300 Jews on the island of Jerba who decided to remain. But because they were such a religious population, they were so traditional, they weren't the same as the Jews in the rest of North Africa that just went to France or went to Canada or to Israel. They were very, very traditional and they stayed in this ghetto and they had many, many children. So the average family in Jerba sometimes has up to 10 kids. So between the 1980s, when there were only a few hundred Jews in Jerba, to today, the community has really grown a lot. They're up to 1,600, but they're a very self-sustaining community. So they all live in almost a ghetto. It's a Jewish town in the city of Jerba. It's protected by the government, so there's checkpoints to go in and out. They don't even teach standard Arabic to their kids. Their children only learn Judeo-Arabic and Hebrew. And they receive a very, very limited secular education. So most of them learn to be rabbis, to be kosher slaughterers. And then sometimes what they do to earn money is they go work in Europe at the kosher slaughterhouses for a season and send money back. Um, but it's an interesting model of how Jews have been able to thrive in the Arab world in the modern era. And their way of thriving was basically secluding themselves from the rest of society, not teaching the language, not teaching professions that could easily be
I was in
exported if
Germany.
they chose to immigrate to other places. Jerba has was in the news recently. Well, it's been in the news quite a bit because they've had several terror attacks at the El Griba synagogue, that very, very ancient synagogue that I showed you. While I was in Jerba, the Bondi Beach attack happened, and I think this is an interesting clip to show because this is a Jewish community that's experienced terrorism over time. I believe their last major terror attack, was 2023 at the El Griba synagogue. It was a policeman who kind of went rogue when there was a major pilgrimage at the synagogue. Um, I filmed people and asked them what message do they have for the Jews in Sydney after the attack, themselves coming from a community that's experienced a lot of terror. And I think that this clip is going to help explain their mentality of survival.
Tunisia, when the Sydney attack happened, I asked the local Jews what advice they have for other Jewish communities.
They should, according to him, they should not gather in big, lots of people together in one place. Brings eyes and it's more easy to target them. They should stay safe for themselves, and then the rest, Hashem will keep them safe also. Basically, he should hide his Jewish identity, not to show his Jewish identity. It should not show their where the Jewish symbols. خاطر كله تعرف كله خاطر فازت على 6 أكتوبر والبرصة ولات كنا على العبارة الحمد لله. Basically saying after October 7, the hate to Jewish people is bigger, and you should not, when you talk to somebody and he knows that you're Jewish, it changes. Suddenly he was talking to you in this way, it changes to he talks to you another way. So you should not show that you are Jewish. should hide your identity.
خدمة على الحكاية دي تاع باش يعملوا شنات على العبارة فهمني.
Basically, thinking that a lot of people are working on making this Jewish hate bigger and bigger.
So I think we shouldn't pass judgment on the Jews of Jerba. This is a community that's existed for thousands of years, and this is how they're able to survive and thrive, is by keeping their heads down. So they don't like to stand out too much. They disassociate themselves from Israel. So they say, we're Tunisian Jews. We have nothing to do with Israel, even if that's not how they feel in their hearts. And this is a survival mechanism for them in order to be able to live in the Arab world and grow as a community. Because in most other Jewish communities in the Arab world, which you're going to hear about, they're only aging and shrinking. Next, we're going to go to Syria, where there are only 6 Jews remaining.
I'm at the Jewish cemetery in Damascus, Syria, and I'm looking for the newest graves in the cemetery because the newest graves tell you whether there are still Jews in the community. Today, there are 6 Jews remaining in Syria here in Damascus, and we found a grave from 2025, meaning that this was a death from this year. There were 3 people from the Damascus Jewish community who passed away this year. They were around 100 years old. And what's interesting is that the grave is in Hebrew and in Arabic. And so apparently they can show local people the text, and the local people copy the Hebrew letters, and that's how they do it. The last rabbi left Syria in 1992, so they don't have a spiritual leader per se to lead the services. Typically what they do is they send the body to a Muslim religious person to wash the body, and then they bring them to the cemetery and they bury them. But it's interesting that despite the fact that they don't have a full Jewish burial, they still have Hebrew on the gravestone.
And then Adam, is there one more clip about Syria, or was I just want to see if that was the only one?
I'm at the
There's one more.
Yeah, let's show the next one, and then I'll speak about Syria.
I was determined to find the last Jews living in Syria. And so when I had some free time on the tour, I went around the old Jewish neighborhood and asked, are there any Jews still living here? And one man said, I know of one, let me take you to him. We showed up at his house. He had a mezuzah in his home, and it was the same home he was born in. Him and his 2 sisters are half of the Jewish community left in Syria, and because there's no longer kosher food, he is a strict vegetarian. He also assists with the burials of the last members of the community. In typical Syrian hospitality, he invited me inside, and I drank tea and smoked shisha with him and his Muslim friend Mazen. Mazen told me that a year ago, the Assad regime took him in, and the secret police asked him, why are you friends with this Jew? Mazen said, this Jew, he's a Syrian. Where is that?
Jamal Sheikh, you know?
Is that a village?
No,
Oh, it's a mountain. Mountain. Very nice.
beside Pakistan.
Yeah.
Israel is,
Israel in that direction.
yes.
Wow. Unless Jews move back to Syria in the next few decades, I likely witnessed the final chapter of a 3,000-year-old Jewish community.
So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the situation for the Jews in Syria. Under the Assad regime, they faced enormous restrictions in terms of their movement, what they were allowed to do professionally. They weren't allowed to travel abroad. If they did travel abroad, they had to leave some family members behind, similar to the Soviet Union. But basically, in the early 90s, the remaining 4,000 Jews in Syria were able to leave the country. Judy Feld-Carr was largely responsible for their exodus. She's a Canadian woman who Ada and I have spoken to. Fascinating story. She'd be a great person to have as a Kesher speaker. But bottom line is the 4,000 remaining Jews left Syria in the early 90s, but 100 people decided to stay for various reasons. Of the 100 people who decided to stay, there are only 6 of them still remaining. One of them is the man that you saw there, Bahor, and 2 of the other 6 are his sisters. One married a Muslim and one married a Christian. They decided to stay Jewish in Syria, even when the last rabbi left, when the last kosher slaughterer left. Bechor decided to become a vegetarian when the last rabbi left because there was no longer kosher meat, and he is a vegetarian to this day. He prays in the synagogue in Damascus, which the government holds the key for on his own. When there's a Jewish funeral, he's not a rabbi or a particularly religious person. He has to basically preside over the funeral in whichever way he can. And these people became living monuments to a Jewish community that was thousands of years old. And these people were not remarkable people. They were ordinary members of the community. But because they decided to stay in Syria, they became living monuments to the community. Last year, there were 9 Jews in Syria. 3 died within the first 5 months of last year. And it's a very, very old population. And so it is not unreasonable to assume that, maybe within the next 10 to 15 years, the very final Jews in Syria will no longer be around. And Syria, like Libya, which Adam will be speaking about, will no longer have Jews. I think it's worth mentioning that there's been a change of government in Syria. The attitude towards Jews and Israel has changed. There is a dedicated person within the foreign affairs ministry of the new Syrian government who deals with Jewish affairs with the large Syrian Jewish diaspora. There's discussions around property restitution for people whose property was taken away when they left Syria. So it's a place that's changing, but Syria is also quite an unstable country, and we don't know if this détente right now and this openness to the Jewish community will last indefinitely. But what we do know is that for right now, there is renewed engagement between the new Syrian government and world Jewry. Next, we're going to go to Ethiopia.
I recently met 2 Jews in Ethiopia with completely different histories. Kansan was born in Aden in modern-day Yemen. In 1950, as a teenager, he moved with his family to Asmara, then part of Ethiopia, today in Eritrea. Eldad belongs to the Beta Israel community. His ancestors were forced to convert from Judaism to Christianity. Today, he is undergoing an Orthodox conversion process to formally rejoin the Jewish people. I visited both their synagogues. One is the Beta Israel synagogue, built about 20 years ago, representing an emerging Jewish community in Ethiopia. The other is Sukkot Rachamim, the Adeni synagogue built in 1924. It is now used mainly by Chabad and on major Jewish holidays. It stands as a reminder of the past, when several hundred Adeni Jews lived in Addis Ababa. Kansan is 90 years old, Eldad is 34. Together, they represent the past and the future of Ethiopian Jewry. Want to spend a week?
So I think what's interesting about this is that when we think about Jews from Ethiopia, we think about the Beta Israel who made Aliyah. But what we don't realize is there are many descendants of Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity hundreds of years ago, who are re-embracing Judaism. And that was the example of Eldad. So in Addis Ababa, the capital, there is a community of Beta Israel. There are several hundred of them. And they some of them are now undergoing an Orthodox conversion process. They want to rejoin the Jewish people formally. They have a synagogue. They learn Hebrew with a rabbi. And some of them want to stay in Ethiopia. So sometimes there are communities where we think the community's over. They all made Aliyah to Israel. But then all of a sudden you find these new people who emerge who say, actually, we want to be the future of the Jewish community of this country. So I think with Ethiopia, its Jewish chapter is not over yet. There is a future. There is a young population of people who want to actively be Jewish and have a Jewish life there. But then there's also a section of the community, which you're going to hear about now, and we heard a little bit about before, which is virtually extinct. And that the mainstream Jewish community was very much the Adeni community. So Jews crossed over from Yemen, modern day Yemen, and where they were traders in places like Ethiopia, Eritrea, even Somalia and Somaliland. And they were the established Jewish community. We're gonna play a quick clip about Kamzan, who is one of the last two Adeni Jews. That's also a Jewish community that doesn't exist anymore in Aden, Yemen. He's one of the last 2 Adeni Jews in Ethiopia.
Because the emperor never wanted them to leave, Emperor Haile Selassie. He treated them with gloves very good, that they were here. and Israel never encouraged them. I had many chances to fight for them. When they arrived in Asmara, any one of them, we managed to get for him a job in a plastic factory and other Jewish people.
Was this in the 70s and the 80s? What
60s.
Back in the 60s,
Yeah.
and you knew that they were Jewish?
We call them falasha, but they are Jewish.
From Gondar, the Falasha, did they pray in the synagogue in Asmara?
Yes.
So you prayed together, the Adenis and
Yes.
Want to spend a week learning about.
So again, I think this is one of these stories that not many people are still around to tell. And that's that you had the Adeni Jews who would mix with the Gondar Jews. So the basically the white Jews and the black Jews. So when the black Jews from other parts of Ethiopia would come to Eritrea looking for jobs, they would the Adeni Jews who were business people who owned factories would give them jobs because they were fellow Jews, and they would pray together as equals at the synagogue in Asmara. They were recognized as Jews by the local Adeni community, even at a time when the state of Israel wouldn't recognize them as Jews and wouldn't allow them to make Aliyah. I just think that Kansan's story is fascinating because, again, he's 90 years old. There's only two left. And he remembers two communities that are basically extinct, the Jewish community of Aden and the Adeni Jewish community in Addis Ababa. The Adeni synagogue is still open in Addis. It's primarily used by Chabad, but there isn't an Adeni community there anymore. Now we're going to go to a different part of the continent and see what Judaism looks like even when there aren't Jews anymore.
I visited the Sharon School in Harare, Zimbabwe. It was founded in the 1960s for a Jewish community that once numbered in the thousands. Today, Harare's Jewish community is down to only about 50 people, and the school has just 2 Jewish students left. Yet, it still runs as a fully Jewish school. I came on a Friday morning as more than 200 non-Jewish students prepared for Shabbat.
Sin that the Israelites ever committed. What was it?
And then I'm just see if the next clip is also Zimbabwe or if I should speak about it.
Bulawayo is the second largest city in Zimbabwe. At its peak, it had 3,000 Jews, and over the past several years, its Jewish population has been reduced from over 100 to just 32.
The first white person to be hung here was a Jew. There were numerous mayors here, maybe 5 or 6 Jewish mayors of this town. There was an MP, A.B. Abramson, a very famous MP. A.B. Abramson was a stalwart of this community. His father-in-law, Sam Rabinovitz, was the stalwart of this community. They kept it going. They raised the funds together with other people. I mean, they raised money for Carmel. They raised money for Parkview Sports Club, Weitzman Sports Club. It was an incredible community. The last Jewish mayor here, I think, was Eugene Gordon. But there was Eugene Gordon, there was Ulrich Goldwasser, there was 5 or 6 different mayors that were here over a period of time.
Want to spend a week learning about some of the world's...
And then Adam, just next clip, I just want to see if it's one more Zim or if I'm gonna... Okay, so this is the final one that I'm going to be speaking about is Zimbabwe. So I think what's really interesting about Zimbabwe, it was such a strong Jewish community. It had 7,000 members. Half of the community actually was Sephardic in the capital Harare. They mostly came originally from the island of Rhodes in modern-day Greece. This was a community that had Jewish schools, Jewish old age homes, I went to a huge building in Bulawayo. It was huge, and it was just a youth center because the community in Bulawayo had hundreds of young people with youth movements, with Hebrew schools. And what's quite amazing is that the community has really emptied out. And as you heard in Bulawayo, they went from having thousands of members to being down today to just 32 members. In Harare, it's about 50 something members. So there's about fewer than 100 Jews left in the country. But I mean, this was a community that was so important that, leaders from the state of Israel, when they would come to Southern Africa, would stop in Rhodesia and meet with the Jewish community. They would fundraise for Israel. I was pretty struck by two things. One, as you heard, was the Jewish schools. So in both Harare and Bulawayo, they decided to keep the schools Jewish. Um, that was actually a decision by the non-Jewish parents. So the non-Jewish parents felt that the schools should still remain Jewish schools because it gives those schools a unique factor. And I think they like Jewish values and Jewish ethos. So again, even though like in Bulawayo, I don't think there's a single Jewish student left at the school. They fly the Israeli flag. They celebrate Shabbat every Friday. In Harare at the school, there are maybe a couple of Jewish students, maybe like three or four. But again, they do Shabbat. They do, up until recently, they did Hebrew. They do Jewish studies. They learn Jewish songs. So they're perpetuating Jewish education even when there are not Jews there anymore. And it's really interesting that this is actually coming, as I mentioned, from the non-Jewish parents, not necessarily from the Jewish community. I also think that something that's interesting about Bulawayo, you saw the older man in the cemetery, is that Jews were really at the very founding of Bulawayo and Harare. They were the mayors. They were some among the first residents in these cities were Jews. They helped build this society. And who would have ever thought that the Jewish community would be at its final generation right now? Which is why I say you might be sitting in Boca Raton or Chicago or Seattle, and you think this is it. We're at the end of history. Our community's thriving. Nothing can ever change. That's absolutely not true. We are not at the end of history. There are communities that were really thriving that never thought that they would have an end. And they had an end because the world changes. And sometimes the world changes very quickly and in very unexpected ways, and Jews move. Only 3.6% of people around the world today live outside of their country of birth. More than 20% of Jews live outside of their country of birth. That's more than five times more than the average, 5 times more than the average person. So Jews tend to move a lot more than the average person in the world. And we tend to react very quickly when there are major political or economic changes in the country. So I'll hand it over to Adam to our final destinations.
Thank you, Dan. And speaking of communities that never expected to end, I'm going to take you to Iraq next. As you know, the story of Iraqi Jews really starts with Ur, which is the birthplace of Abraham almost 6,000 years ago. And it more or less ended in my parents' lifetime. As a Sephardic Jew, I saw my trip to Iraq as a sort of rescue mission, not to save any sort of people, right? They're almost all gone, but to save the memory of them, to capture the physical proof that they were there before the current neglect sort of swallows all their remnants whole. My journey started in ancient Assyria. It was a quiet Christian village called Al-Kush, and I was there to find the tomb of the prophet Nahum. And Nahum in Hebrew means comforter. And honestly, as intrepid as I am, I did need a little bit of comfort. Iraq is a place where, as a Jew, you usually have to keep your head down. But here in this tiny village, I found crisp Hebrew inscriptions, recently restored and perfectly preserved. And why? Because for decades, a local Christian family, a Syrian Christian family, protected it. And because the local Kurdish forces stood their ground against ISIS, who were just miles away, to make sure that this shrine didn't burn. It's the only Jewish site in all of Iraq that hasn't been turned into a mosque or left to rot. But then I drove south to Mosul. which is Nineveh in the Bible, and that comfort that I got from Nahum disappeared. And if you want to see what the end looks like, go to Mosul, or I'll just take you there in this video. It's absolutely apocalyptic in the old city. I went on a sort of scavenger hunt through the ruins of the old city, and I was looking for the Mahalat al-Yahud, which is the Jewish quarter. I found houses that were literally skeletons, but if you look closely at the lattice work, sometimes tucked behind Islamic patterns, there were very visible Stars of David. And I want to give you a 1-minute walkthrough of Mahalat al-Yahud, the old Jewish quarter of Mosul. And there are a couple surprises that might await. The capital of ISIS's former caliphate, the most brutal terrorist regime to plague the modern Middle East, was in Mosul, Iraq's former Jewish quarter. Yes, the Jewish quarter of the biblical city of Nineveh and ISIS's headquarters, terrifyingly, were in the exact same place. Everything here in Old Mosul is destroyed, except, ironically, signs that this was once home to a thriving Jewish community. It didn't take me long to find Stars of David etched into the latticework of those former Jewish homes. Sometimes they were hidden among Islamic motifs from the residents who inherited these homes after the Jewish residents were expelled in the Farhud pogroms of the 1940s. Other times, the Stars of David were more strangely easy to find in the bombed-out old city. Another hidden sign of Mosul's Jewish ghosts is in the mortar itself. See these pots? Mostly Jews were famous for storing their wealth inside of them and then embedding the pots into the walls for safekeeping. But nothing and nowhere was safe during the ISIS occupation of Mosul. Even today, I had to look for graffiti marking "safe." These tags helped me avoid a potential run-in with undetonated explosives. First, the Farhud made these houses off-limits to Jews. Then ISIS made them off-limits to everyone. But even ghosts can survive an apocalypse. Excellent. The most chilling thing that I found while walking around the old city of Mosul was a grand mansion on the Tigris River. And this mansion was haunted because ISIS had turned it into a prison and a sniper outpost and also a torture chamber. I climbed to the top floor to the exact spot where the sniper sat, and I looked at the wall. And there, framing the sniper's view, were frescoed Stars of David. Think about that. A Jewish home, local residents, after they were expelled, and then an ISIS death chamber. Now, simply a pile of rubble. It felt like all these layers of history were sort of brutally compressed into one tragically small space. I kept moving south from Mosul to Baghdad, and in the early 1900s, 1/3 of Baghdad was Jewish. They weren't just a minority. They were the engine of the city. And I found that a lot of locals, the older locals, still remember them as such. They were the doctors, the musicians, and even the finance minister. I walked into a neighborhood that is still to this day called Al-Torat, which in Arabic means the Torah. There's still a sign that says the Torah neighborhood. And the ghosts there were everywhere. I found an old Jewish school, the Masuda Salman School. It used to hold 400 students, and now it's a warehouse filled with cheap Iranian-produced plastic toys. And then I looked up at the doorway, and the Hebrew sign is still there. It hadn't been chiseled away. And the neighbors knew exactly what this was, even the younger ones. There's sort of this strange, lingering nostalgia for the version of Iraq that was diverse, even among the people who never lived through that era. I'm going to take you to another neighborhood, though, in Baghdad called Al-Batawin, which was the other center of Jewish life in Baghdad. And now it's the second most dangerous neighborhood in the city. Very, very decrepit, full of brothels and gangs. It's recently been cleaned up a little bit. But one of the things that has not been cleaned up is this beautiful, formerly beautiful Jewish mansion that has one resident inside today. I will play the video and you'll see. I snuck into this abandoned Jewish villa in Baghdad, Iraq, and the only soul left to greet me was a very disgruntled donkey. I'm in Batawin. Today, it's one of the Iraqi capital's poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods.
a place of gangs, prostitution, and crumbling shield houses. But in the early 20th century, this was one of Baghdad's most prestigious enclaves. As I walked up the grand staircase, the only sound was the crunch of glass and debris underneath my boots. It wasn't hard to imagine the lives that once filled these rooms. I could see the ghost of that grandeur everywhere. Multiple fireplaces and sitting rooms, an expansive panoramic rooftop, latticework still holding its six-pointed Star of David motifs.
Star of David.
The prosperity of the exiled family who lived here is still etched into the walls. Bedouin's decline mirrored their departure, but beneath the decay, the neighborhood refuses to hide what it once was. Just a few streets away, the Mer Twag, Baghdad's last standing synagogue, remains. It has been fully abandoned since the 2003 U.S. invasion, a silent witness to a history that the dust hasn't managed to cover. None of the locals I spoke to on the street here seem to know what this building once was. For now, this donkey is the only heir to Bedouin's grandest remaining Jewish estate.
All right. There's so much more I could say about Iraq. It was one of my most interesting journeys of finding and bottling up the last Jewish remnants in countries where they will all disappear. I did have the pleasure of meeting the officially last Jew of Baghdad, Dr. Khalida, I was really touched by some of her efforts to restore as much as she can before she departs from Iraq herself. So let me go to Libya as a next country here, and it's going to be the final country that we go to before we take Q&A. Libya is a country that's caught in this sort of cycle of total reset. And in most places, like you saw in Iraq, history is sort of a layer cake. Think of that building in Mosul, right? Jewish home, then home to locals, and ISIS prison, now rubble, right? In Libya, it's kind of a chalkboard that gets erased every few decades, or even shorter than that. And I saw this first with the Gaddafi erasure. So 42 years of a tyrant's life, totally scrubbed from every building, every signpost, and now you can only hear it in a few very hushed whispers. I saw it in the city center where Italian cathedrals, right? The Italians were colonizers for a brief period in Libya, were stripped of their crosses the second that the Italian colonizers left. Sorry, let me go back to, there we go. But Libya's ultimate act of burial, right? The one that required a literal scavenger hunt to find, and probably my hardest one yet, was its Jewish history. 2,500 years of civilization reduced to what I call the presence of absence. Libya is probably the only Arab country where this biblically ancient community is definitively and totally extinct. And it wasn't a slow fade. It was a violent exit that peaked in 1967, the Six-Day War. Under Gaddafi, the erasure became government policy. Cemeteries became parks, synagogues became parking lots. And I had this challenge, like, how do you document a ghost, right? And what I quickly learned in Libya is that you have to feign disinterest. Because I was escorted by armed police at all times, literally to the bathroom, I had to be nonchalant whenever I would pass a Jewish site, which would be a frequent occurrence in Tripoli, where a quarter of the city was Jewish. I would never use the word synagogue. I was just sort of a curious tourist whose interest spiked by quote unquote old churches. Our route would sort of accidentally pass by the sites that Gaddafi and Libyans had destroyed from their Jewish past. And the biggest ghost that you'll see is this synagogue here, the Darbishi Synagogue. It's a silent stone boarded up building looming over a maze of alleyways. It's in this decades long limbo, covered in bullets, holes, and neglect. But you could still see the stars of David and the Ten Commandments carved into the stone above my head there. From the coast, I went to the Nafusa Mountains to a village called Jadu. And if you walk through Jadu today, it looks like any other town. It's got ancient Sahara granaries, which is what you see in the picture there on the right hand side. There's no prominent plaque, nothing, right? But during World War II, this was the site of the largest Nazi concentration camp in North Africa. Thousands of Libyan Jews here were sent to starve. There's not really a monument, or one that's easy to find at least, mostly just a desert plateau and silence. And when I was standing there, I realized that civilizations don't just vanish here in Libya. They're edited out of the narrative, right? And we are actually probably the very last generation of witnesses to the physical fragments of a biblically old civilization that had existed there. And this sort of presence of absence, as I mentioned earlier, is getting quieter and quieter, and the silence is all that will eventually be left. The most remarkable stop on my journey, though, was a village called Yefren, which my guides had never been to, and I had to build enough rapport to get me to go. It was a village that was almost 50% Jewish at one point, where Jewish and Berber cultures were so tightly bound that they even, shared a language, right? A Berberized dialect of Judeo-Arabic. When I was there, I was looking for the Kabbaliya synagogue. The Kabbaliya synagogue is likely the second oldest synagogue in the world, after the Riba synagogue that Dan had talked about earlier. It's not on any map. My guides had never been to Yefren, let alone had heard about the synagogue, but I found it. It looked like a local storehouse. And a local caretaker showed up with a key and led us into this quote unquote old church. And I'm so glad they call it an old church, because that's probably one of the only reasons why it's still standing. Inside, it's like a cave. It's a cave synagogue. The walls are covered in unpolished Hebrew script, and the caretaker was stunned that I had found it. All right. I asked him, as you'll see in the video, what language is that, and nobody even knew. But let me go to the video, which is our final one of the presentation, and then we'll go to Q&A.
This is one of the oldest synagogues still standing in the world, and no Jew has prayed here for decades. Until the other week, when I convinced authorities to unlock the rusty padlock for me. This is the Kabbaliya synagogue in Yefren, Libya. It's incorrectly labeled on Google Maps. Locals think it's a storehouse, and the caretaker called it an old church, even though it was built 200 years before Christ by the Judeans who settled here in the mountains of Libya following the destruction of the Temple of Solomon. I asked the local caretaker, what language is that, pointing at the ceiling? He shrugged his shoulders and said, some ancient language. Yefren went from being half Jewish to having no Jews at all in barely a year, that year being, of course, 1948. The Jews in Yefren used to be integrated into the local Amazigh or Berber population, so much so that a Berberized dialect of Judeo-Arabic emerged here. Now Kabbaliya, their last trace, is hiding in plain sight. Will this historic synagogue masquerading as an old church, which survived over 2 millennia, survive the next decade?
Okay. So just to recap in 2 sentences here, Dan and I have a tremendous passion for documenting once timeless communities that are now on extinction's clock, right? And the two of us are refusing to let dwindling demographics, often down to one or actually no Jewish souls, right, in Libya's case, mean total oblivion. Dan had mentioned earlier, 85% of the world's Jews now live in just 2 countries, Israel and the United States. And while Jews dominate the headlines for war and conflict, unfortunately, these days, these chapters of history are now closing on us in total silence. So with that, we have 10 minutes left. We'd love to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna just close the screen so we can see each other in the gallery. Thank you, Adam and Dan. And I just maybe before we get into questions, we have many. So I don't know if do you only have 10 minutes or do you have maybe 15?
I personally have 10 because I have to run to a wedding after.
Okay,
But
so I'll
yeah.
start with those that are for you, and then
Sounds good.
Dan, do you
Perfect.
have a bit more? Then we can end with Dan.
No problem.
But if you guys want to just say a couple of words about Project Diaspora, that what is it that you do? Like, I mean, we understood that you go to the places, but you plan to take trips, and if there's anything for the audience to know about how they can join you, support you, what is it that yeah, if you want
Yeah,
to
well,
share a
it's
bit
so it's
about that.
interesting. So we have been focusing a lot on multimedia, creating videos like some of the ones that you saw because we realize not everyone is going to travel to these places, but we want to show people what these places look like. We want people to be able to hear from the people who are the sole survivors in these communities. So, yeah, we actually had a very active social media. Meta took our social media down about a week ago with no explanation. So we are working at getting it back. It's quite shocking that people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson get to stay on Meta, but we don't. So we're working on getting it back. So I would say look out for our social media. We're hopefully going to get it back. Adam and I continue to travel, continue to share stories. We are potentially working on a documentary about the last Jews in Syria. So I think we'll be in touch with Kesher, and as interesting things to watch come out, you can, of course, share them with the community. Adam, anything that you want to share?
No, that sums it up. Yeah, thank you, Dan. Yeah.
Wow, okay, but that's crazy that your social
Yeah.
media disappeared. We didn't know about that either.
We,
We were
we,
gonna
we, we
share
get
all
a
that
lot
with everyone.
we get a lot of hate. We get a lot of hate in the comments on our social media, and Adam and I cannot monitor every single comment. Some people love what we do, some people don't love what we do. And Adam, I mean, this is an interesting thing to share with people. I mean, from the Jewish community, there's some people who think it's amazing what we're doing. And then there's some people who say, like, this is a chapter that should have closed. This is a wound that's been healed. Don't reopen the wound. So I don't think that we get universal support from the Jewish community about documenting this. Some people say, why should we pay any attention to these stupid final people who decided to stay in places like Syria? They were fools. So there's a lot of judgment, I think, within the Jewish community for both the people who decided to stay as well as the people who want to tell these stories. I mean, Adam, do you want to share anything about that?
For sure. I think Dan's exactly right. The preponderance of people who we speak to are tremendously curious about these very unique places and people that we've been able to access. But for those for whom it awakens old wounds, and for those who politicize our existence, it's been very tough to receive the curiosity that we think this project merits.
Thank you. So I'll look for the questions that are for Adam. Adam, could you briefly discuss the status of Jewish life in Egypt, as we mentioned that you have Egyptian descent?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to be in touch with whoever asked this question because I have a lot to say about this. There are around 2 Jews that I was able to find left in Alexandria, both very elderly who had never left. There's a community of, I would say, around 10 in Cairo who also never left. It's led by a woman named Magda, who is a very interesting person, very politically involved as well. And has a lot of things to say about Israel that are not complimentary because of obvious reasons for her life. Right, it's made her life a lot more complicated to stay in her own homeland. Right, but she has hosted Passover seders before for the community, plus visiting Jews before, which is kind of funny. It's like a reverse Passover, right, going back to Egypt. But there's a lot of efforts now to restore Jewish cemeteries, synagogues in both Alexandria and Cairo that are underway, and many of them have finished. It's very possible to visit these Jewish sites. It's just that the community itself is pretty hidden from main view. Yeah, and even
Thank
more.
you. And actually, we have a full talk about Egypt coming up in June. So those of you who are interested, look out for that. The next 2 questions, Adam, are about Iraq, whether you've been to Kurdish regions, whether you've been to Zaho, and if there are any pictures about Mosul from before it was destroyed, the Jewish area of Mosul.
Okay. I wish I made it to Mosul before the Jewish area was destroyed. I only made it there after the
No, I
ISIS
mean not
occupation.
from you, but
Oh,
from
in
in
general? Oh,
general
for
in
sure.
history.
Yeah.
There are any pictures.
There are plenty, definitely. There was a huge community in Mosul. Um, I did make it to Zaho, and I did travel around the Kurdish region. The tomb of Nahum is actually in the Kurdish region, right, of Iraq. It's the most significant Jewish site that remains in the Kurdish region. Most of Jewish history that I was trying to find was in the federal Iraq region below Mosul and below. And I was able to go to Babylon, the tomb of Ezekiel, and El Kefil, which is near Hila, Babylon, and Baghdad, Zaho, etc. Yeah, so I pretty much made it everywhere. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I think these were the ones that are specifically for you. So I'm gonna continue with the
Perfect.
general questions, and then Adam, when you need to go, we know you're
No
in a
problem.
wedding, so don't keep the couple waiting.
No worries.
And then if Dan, you can stay just a few more minutes, maybe we
Sure, no
can
problem.
get to some more questions. Um, do you do interviews of pe with people, and do you record music, folk tales, examples of spoken languages? So and there were also questions about ethnomusicology. So just in general, what is your approach towards this cultural elements when you meet people?
It's a great question. Anytime that we can safely interview somebody and document the most unique aspects of their culture or their language traditions, we do so, right? Obviously, when you're meeting the last Jew of Iraq, you can't really do that, right? It's not a public persona, and that is critical to her safety and perseverance in the country. But Dan has, as you saw, talked to the last Jews of Syria, Zimbabwe, really every country that we visited, we tried to track down the last people who are preserving these ancient lineages and then hear their languages, their cultures, etc. Yeah.
But again, I think part of the challenge is that, you interview people in these places and then it gets put in a public platform like Meta, Instagram, Facebook, and that opens it to the world and that opens it up to a lot of hate. So I think it's like an interesting question of like, should these interviews continue to happen? Where is a safe space to feature them? Not only for our own safety as a as an initiative, but also as Adam mentioned, for the people who we're interviewing. For a lot of these people, they've survived by keeping their heads down and by going in front of a camera. They're drawing a lot of attention to themselves, and when that's uploaded in a public platform, people then know who they are. So there's lots of safety considerations. I love the idea of documenting more about language and music. I think that's really great. I did a bit of that in Tunisia when I was in Jerba. But yeah, I mean, I would love, for example, the Bachor, one of the last Jews in Syria, I would love to hear how he conducts a service, or I'd love for him to sing some traditional Syrian Jewish songs. So that's a great idea.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what type of security did you need to visit Syria?
So I did not need security to visit Syria. Syria is actually quite safe. Right now, it's probably one of the safest countries in the Middle East. The war between Israel and Iran has not reached Syria. There were issues when I was in Syria. So Israel actually bombed Syria. Well, hi, Adam. Israel actually bombed Syria when I was in Damascus. So that was a safety issue. They also were shooting Christians at bars when I was in Damascus, so we stayed away from bars later on the trip. But listen, Israel's not safe either. The Middle East is not, you don't go to the Middle East to be safe. Even the UAE is not safe right now. So I didn't have specific Syria security, but I think that when you travel to the Middle East, you have to know that it can change at any moment, and that includes Israel.
Thank you. The next question is from Ed, who's been to Morocco and he observed Jewish tombstones in a language or with a script that is on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and whether you've seen something similar in Tunisia.
In terms of a unique script?
In terms of this script that is on, yeah, it's like a
Interesting.
Berber.
Yeah, so I
Um,
mean, I think what's super interesting is, when we think about Jewish languages, we often just think about like maybe like Yiddish and Ladino, but in so many of these communities, they had their own Jewish dialects. So, for example, in Tunisia, they spoke Judeo-Arabic. which is written in Hebrew letters, similar to Yiddish, but it's like a completely different language. When I was in northern Morocco, I was in Tangier and a few other places. I believe their language, the Jewish language, is called like Hakatiya, which is yeah, with Hebrew letters, but I think it's like a mix of like Arabic and Spanish and Hebrew. So yeah, I find that in most of these communities there are Jewish languages and Jewish dialects, but again, they get completely lost. So yeah, and the truth is that I think we as people who think about Jewish education, we need to think about how do we teach the next generation about those languages. Because I can tell you, I got a pretty decent Jewish education growing up in the US. I never learned about any of this.
Thank you. Are you in contact with organizations such as Harif and Kulanu?
So we work a lot with, there's the American Sephardic Foundation, ASF. We also work with the American Sephardic Brotherhood. So there are many organizations out there. We work with some of them. We tend to work more with sort of Sephardic and Mizrahi organizations just because a lot of that heritage isn't preserved. But yeah, we're always open to talking to various organizations. And again, the things that we're seeing, are not going to be around forever. And let's be honest, most Jews aren't comfortable going to these places, so there just aren't that many people going to document them.
Thank you. How can people support your project?
People can support our project by hopefully when our documentary comes out, watching it. Hope to get it on a streaming service. Following us on social media if Meta decides to restore it. And of course, we'll be in touch with Kesher. And I think that once things are restored and there is a way for you to see more of our content, we'll obviously send it to Kesher and Kesher can share it with you. But I think that even just by being here today and hearing these stories, that's a testament to your support and interest. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Do you plan any trips to these communities?
Um, yeah, so it's interesting. We had a trip that was planned to Syria, actually, because again, the last Jews of Syria are going to be passing away soon. And we actually didn't get enough signups. So we had like 11 people signed up, and then in the end, we only had between 3 and 5 who were willing to go. I think people are just really, I think Jews are really scared right now, generally. I think Jews are very scared right now about the state of the world, and I think it's really hard to get people to go to these places. That's why we're thinking of maybe focusing more on just documenting so people can at least see this from the comfort of their own home, but see what these places look like and hear these stories. Um, yeah, I mean, as I said, Israel's not safe right now. So Jews don't feel often safe in their home countries right now. We're in a really weird time in Jewish history. We lived through a golden era that is over, and we're transitioning to something else. And so people are very scared. So I get why not everyone necessarily wants to travel right now, but the golden era is over.
Can you say something about hidden Jews in these communities? Are there Jews who are uncounted?
Yes, for sure. So I'll give an example. I spent time in Afghanistan. The last Jews were out of Afghanistan when I was there, but there was a famous story about this guy. It was like him and this other guy were like the last two Jews of Kabul. They were living in the synagogue. They didn't speak to each other. They both eventually left Afghanistan. And once they left, the people said, "Oh, okay, well, there are no more Jews left in Afghanistan." And then I think about a year later, they found a woman who had married a Muslim man. She never converted to Islam, but she was a Jewish woman, raised a Muslim family, and they found her eventually, and they got her out of Afghanistan. So they thought that the last Jew was out, and then they found someone else who actually was Jewish. So I find that in terms of like hidden Jews, I mean, I was in Algeria, people were telling me stories, from not that long ago that, they had a friend who had like, a Jewish father who married a Muslim woman and was very, secretive about it. So, there were people in these communities who intermarried and who just kept a very low profile. So sometimes we think there are no Jews left in these places, and then, like what happened in Afghanistan, we suddenly find someone in the woodwork who was, married out, didn't raise a Jewish family, but they're Jewish. So I think that's always really interesting to see. again, places like Algeria, we typically think there are no Jews left there. And then when I was in Algiers, I spent time at the Jewish cemetery, and the caretaker said, "Oh no, there's at least 100 Jews in Algiers. They come to the synagogue, they come to the cemetery to visit their relatives." So sometimes the numbers that you read on the outside are not necessarily doesn't necessarily reflect the reality on the inside. People are just very, very discreet about their Jewish identities. That's how they're able to stay.
Thank you. Do you two travel together, and how are you funded? So a bit more about
Yeah, so we're
this.
self-funded. We're self-funded. We have very different careers day to day. We just do this because we're passionate about it. Um, and then in terms, so you asked about how we're fun, and then do we travel together? Yeah, Adam and I did travel actually to Kosovo together. We have traveled to a lot of the same places, but not physically together. Adam and I actually have only met once in person, despite the fact that we work so closely together. We have a friend who works at the American Sephardic Foundation, and he said to me, "Dan, you have to meet Adam. He's the Sephardic you." And then he said to Adam, "You have to meet Dan. He's the Ashkenazi you." There are a few other people who do what we do, but there's maybe fewer than five. Very, very few. There's a little community of us who do this stuff. Most Jews are too afraid. Generally, Jews are very fearful right now, anyways, and certainly there are not a lot of Jews who are going to these places. Certainly not people who actually take an interest in Jewish heritage. So you have to have the interest in Jewish heritage, and you have to have the guts to actually go to these places discreetly and safely.
There are so many questions still, but we are reaching the end of our time. So I'll just ask if people want to be in touch with you,
Sure.
help you, do anything, can we share
Sure.
your contact details, or how's
Yeah,
the
you're
best way
welcome. You're
to?
welcome. You're welcome to share our email addresses, and people are welcome to get in touch with us via email. And yeah, just thank you so much again for coming and listening.
Great. So we will share Dan's and Adam's email address, and the moment their social media is back up, hopefully you will be able to follow them if you're interested in the topic. And also, we asked in the registration form if you want to be directly on their newsletter. So those of you who said yes, we will share that list with Dan and Adam, and then you can receive directly their news. So I see there are a lot of questions about entire communities, what's going on in Afghanistan and Yemen and all these places. We dedicate entire talks to many of these places. So we do encourage everyone to also follow our program and check when these are scheduled. Thank you, Dan, and please pass our thanks also to Adam
Thanks.
for sharing your story with us and the story of these communities with us. It's wonderful to see that there are people who actually go there and document these places. Because most of the time, the people we invite are descendants of these places, but were many times not even ever able to visit Iraq or Syria or Iran in their lives, even though they have the heritage and they know a lot. So that is something unique that you add to this, that you've actually been there and talked to the people and saw these places and documented. So thanks so much for doing that and for sharing it with us. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Our next event is actually another get to know. On Tuesday, we will host someone from the Aristides Sousa Mendes Museum from Portugal. She will share with us her own story and also the story of the museum. So if you want to learn about another great project preserving Jewish heritage, please join us also on Tuesday. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Dan, and we wish you a wonderful
Thank
rest of the
you.
day.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
So
everyone for
important.
joining us.
Such important work. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
everyone.
again, as always. As always, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Bye. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining.
شكرا تنميرت باي
Bye. Bye.